This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
A new era of Michigan football gets underway. It's our spring football preview next on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Carter. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
Hey, they said you can't beat Ohio State. Now what?
Brady gets terrific. Throws it. Get it. Touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. And yes, it is the month of March. You made it. I don't know about you. These are the rules. When it hits March, winter's over. Those are the rules. I make them. I hope somebody else can enforce them. So, of course, it is time later this month for Michigan to start spring football, and the Sharon Moore era gets underway in earnest, a brand new era of Michigan football. So what better time to preview what to look for this spring than right now. Here are my top 5 spring football questions that I think Michigan needs to try to answer here between now and the spring game. When is it? Like April 20th, I want to say. How's the chemistry with the new coaching staff? That's the obvious one. I think Sharon Moore, with what he had to do in the time allotment that he had, you're competing now against multiple NFL teams from the same coaching tree. You've got John Harbaugh in Baltimore. Now you got Jimmy Harbaugh in Los Angeles, Mike McDonald in Seattle. We keep forgetting that one. All these people trying to hire the same caliber of coach from a lot of the same ideologies and a lot of the same coaching gene pools. And you're Sharon Moore. You're a young guy, 38 years old. You don't have that kind of gravitas or Rolodex to come out of this with, on paper anyway, seems to be a pretty impressive coaching staff when you look at their resumes and reputations. I think that's the first big test that Sharon Moore had to pass, and I think he did with flying colors. But, you know, the games aren't coached or won on paper. And so now we have to see how this staff meshes, how it works together. And you're going to have some strong personalities in there when you have men like Wink Martindale, for example. And so can this staff come together and inspire at least, you're not going to match the last staff. I mean, that's one of the great coaching staffs in Michigan football history. All right. But can you at least keep the standard? You don't have to be that excellent, but you can't let the standard fall. That's, I think, the first big question that has to be answered this spring. When will you get your answer? Check the transfer portal after the spring game. And if a bunch of guys we were counting on hop in the transfer portal, that's where you give your Carl Lewis singing the national anthem. Okay? So that's when we'll get our first answer to that question. Next, is the corner opposite Will Johnson on campus? I mean, this is really the only question on defense. I think there's some fans of some rival teams that are going to be very disappointed when they see pretty much everybody that stopped Alabama on the last drive of the Rose Bowl, with the exception of Mike Sainristil. Pretty much everybody else is back. I mean, this defense is loaded, and it's got several All-American candidates, 2 at defensive tackle, by the way, and Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham. Will Johnson will be a consensus preseason All-American. And for the second year in a row, the big question on defense is who's the corner opposite him. Michigan came out of spring last year not liking the answers there. And so in the spring portal, it went and got Josh Wallace, a kid who had been a multi-time captain at UMass under Don Brown. Not necessarily a football hotbed, so there was a lot of concern that he would be the weakest link. I mean, Josh Wallace was terrific last year. Josh Wallace was one of the most underrated players in the nation last year. Josh Wallace's best games were the final 2 against Alabama and Washington. He was absolutely terrific. He'll be drafted in April. So Michigan did it once. Can they do it again? Because I think the answer to this question, by the end of spring, we're probably going to find out it's not on campus, and they'll have to go into the portal again. Third, can Michigan find another Jake Moody? Probably not. Or even James Turner. So Jake Moody was a transcendent kicker. For about 10 minutes, he had the record for the longest field goal in the Super Bowl. That lasted about 10 minutes. So can you go get a James Turner? Again, a young man Michigan poached in the spring portal window with local ties from Louisville. He was absolutely terrific and accurate. Not the same kind of, the ball didn't make quite the same sound coming off his foot as it did, Money Moody. But you don't have to be. He was just incredibly effective. Again, a guy who was his best at the end. He was terrific against Ohio State, for example, and was Big Ten Special Teams Player of the Week in the most pressure-packed situation that he faced. So that's a big question, particularly given the complementary style of football that Michigan plays. You're going to have inexperience at quarterback. We'll talk more about that in a second. And so you may not be as efficient in the red zone as you were under J.J. McCarthy with both his legs and his arm. So you're going to need to probably kick more 42, 44-yard field goals this year. Is that guy on campus? There's some highly recruited kickers on campus, but we have not seen any of these guys do anything in a game situation yet. Next, who anchors the offensive line? Michigan set the record for most offensive linemen from one team ever invited to the NFL Scouting Combine, 6. So yeah, Michigan lost essentially an entire offensive line and the swing player in Trente Jones. But this position has been recruited as well as any in the program in the Harbaugh era. There are a lot of impressive recruiting profiles. There are some guys that we've seen play impressively at times. I think of Giovanni El-Hadi, for example, who has had big-time minutes. The Josh Preeb transfer from Northwestern, I think he'll come in and start at one of the other guards. I actually think they won't suffer much of a drop-off on the interior at all. I think Greg Crippen might even be an upgrade over Drake Nugent at center. And then I think the guards, Trevor Keegan, Zach Zinter, that's as good of a guard duo as Michigan has ever had. But, Michigan actually ran the ball better last year after Zinter got hurt. He's one of the great offensive linemen in school history, but it allowed Carson Barnhart to go to his more natural guard position where he was playing out of position as a tackle most of the year. So I think that inner trio, That trio on the interior there, I think, will be one of the best in the Big Ten again, with Preeb and Greg Crippen and also Giovanni El-Hadi. The big questions are at tackle. Miles Hinton actually seemed to be kind of getting it later in the year, and then he got hurt. He was much better the second time he was in the lineup than the first. But who's that other tackle? There are numerous candidates on campus. We shall see. The battle there will rage. And, of course, you might have the best offensive line coach not named Kirk Ferentz in the country as your head coach. So I got to think Michigan will at least be given the coaching there and the way they've recruited, they'll at least be adequate to good on the floor. But that brings us to our number one question of the spring. Who will step forward at quarterback? Now, let me say this from the outset. I don't think this is as big of a loss with J.J. McCarthy as people think. But given the high-profile nature of the position, it has to be your number one question. Now, I'm a JJ guy, man. Got my kid an autographed JJ commemorative football for Christmas a couple years ago. Love JJ McCarthy. When I say I don't think he's going to be as big of a loss as people think, that is no slight on JJ McCarthy. To make my case, let me bring up another player, Cornelius Johnson. Did you guys watch him test at the Combine last weekend? Dudes out there running 4.5s, testing well. This idea, we had this pedestrian receiving core, and so we had to run the ball. No, we didn't. No, I mean, Cornelius Johnson is a pure pro X receiver, 6'3", running 4.45s. No, we just didn't want to throw the ball. I mean, we don't have a quarterback-dependent program here, for better or for worse, but that's the reality. We held JJ back within the scheme that we ran, particularly when it came to running the football, because, it's not throwing the ball all over the yard that opens it up for quarterbacks these days. It's the ability to run the ball with that extra ball handler the defense can't account for in the box that then opens up these wide open passing games. Joe Burrow, mobile quarterback. Lamar Jackson, mobile quarterback. Jaden Daniels, we just saw last year, mobile quarterback. That's what really opens things up, is when the quarterback is unaccounted for, because you can only put so many people dedicated to that when you've got everybody spread out. We didn't run JJ all that much, and then he was hurt at the end of last year when we really could have used his legs to pick up an extra first down or two to close out the Ohio State game, for example. So this is not a quarterback-dependent program, and I don't think, therefore, it's as big a loss as people think. That does not mean, though, it is not a significant loss. It is. I mean, you're talking about a guy with great experience. You're talking about a guy who's a great leader. You're talking about a guy who can throw at, the thing with JJ, it's almost more, from a pro perspective, I'd almost be more impressed that without throwing the ball 40 times a week, when he needed to make a pinpoint throw like that one he made to Roman Wilson against Ohio State, one of the best throws I've ever seen a Michigan quarterback make. I mean, he's not afforded the same rhythm that everybody else is. Everybody else is throwing 30, 40 times a game. You get into a rhythm. JJ was never afforded that. We might run 32 times in a row. You just never knew. And so this really comes down to, do we have a quarterback right now on campus that, when there are strategic times a throw needs to be made to keep the defense honest, can make that throw? And that's why I think the quarterback battle between Alex Orji and Jaden Denegal is going to be closer than people think. I definitely think Orji, who a lot of people think inside the program is the best, has been the best overall athlete in the program the last couple of years, but we've not seen him throw a ball in a high leverage, high pressure situation. I was listening to Sam Webb's talk show on WTKA in Ann Arbor yesterday. He said a couple of interesting things from his sources. I mean, he said that he talked to somebody inside Schembechler Hall who told him that he thought if Jimmy was still here, that Jaden Denegal might actually be the favorite because Harbaugh seemed particularly enamored with him. But he also said that Jack Tuttle, who is getting a 7th year, by the way, he'll be back, but he's having surgery. And so he'll miss the entire spring. And so what that tells me is Denegal and Orji, they have the full spring to make their case that one, if not both of them, can go into the fall as a real challenger to be the starting quarterback at the University of Michigan. And then if they can't, then I think you'll see Michigan go into the portal and try to pluck a guy late who can at least come in here and manage a game for them, given the caliber of running game I think we will have yet again. So those are the big questions that I think Michigan has to answer this spring. What do you think? Let us know in the comments section, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on iTunes. We'll get the perspective from our Bucknut friend, Mark Rogers, to see what he thinks next. Well, let's find out what our maybe one and only Bucknut friend, Mark Rogers, thinks here on the 10-Minute War. And of course, you should be, this time of year especially, following Mark's channel right here on YouTube, the voice of college football, stringers, correspondents, covering teams all over the country. And that, shall we say, off-season news, shall we say, can be profitable during this time of the year to get ahead of markets and maybe know things happening on the ground that haven't reached the Gen Pop yet. And therefore, those lines on some of those win totals haven't been impacted by some of those things. Just saying, for entertainment purposes only, of course. Mark, good to see you, brother. How are you?
I am doing just fine, Steve. Appreciate you being here. But when it comes to the win totals, you are king.
That's kind of my thing. I mean, you do, dude, you are insanely good at game picks against the number. I mean, you are. You ought to be charging people for that, frankly. But the win totals, that's kind of my thing, So, of course, I'm good at the thing that requires you to give Vegas your money for 7 months before you see a profit. That's the thing I'm good at, not the thing that gives you instant gratification. Like I know right away whether I win or loss. No, you've got to give Vegas an interest-free loan for about 7 months to find out if you win or not. That's the thing I'm actually good at, but that's my lament. Let's move on. I laid out what I think are the 5 big questions now to get started this spring on the Sharon Moore era here at Michigan. Your thoughts on those questions? Do you think those are the right questions, or did you come up with another 1 or 2 that maybe I should have thought of?
So I find this situation intriguing, Steve, because let's go back to the genesis of the Michigan resurgence, the reestablishment of Michigan as an elite power in college football. Of course, we go back to 2020 and the great conversations we had back and forth about whether Jim Harbaugh should stay and what he's doing with his coaching staff. Well, what Sharon Moore is being handed and the moves that he is making are also certainly going to be the foundation of success or lack of success going forward. But there are a lot less risks being involved in this situation because of the approach that he's taking. And I got to think that Jim Harbaugh had a lot to do. Maybe some of his parting conversations with Sharon Moore were about, look at what we've built with the chemistry, both from the player to player relationships, but also coach to player and coach to coach relationships, and the working aspect of this and how well it's gone. We have been able to slay more talented football talent, not necessarily better football teams, but better talent, because we had that edge. And that edge came from the coaches, but it also came from the players, and just that kind of magic that you can't completely put your finger on, but you've got an idea. So what Sharon Moore has done, if you go through, and I just did over the last 20 minutes, went through all the staff changes, and we're talking about all internal promotions, or we're talking about coaches that are coming back to the program that have had a taste of success circa 2021 or 2019 in the case of the tight ends coach. And so we are staying within that framework. And then you've got Wink Martindale, of course, the defensive coordinator, who's so tightly connected to and the mentor of, to a certain extent, Mike McDonald and Jess Minter. So I just think that this could not have been orchestrated because change was going to happen. Jim Harbaugh was going to take coaches with him. You were not going to retain a national championship coaching staff. So you're placed in a situation that we have not seen since 1998 and Tom Osborne leaving Nebraska. But to keep it in-house to the extent that they have, and then also bring in key pieces that have a tie to Michigan and understand what it's all about there and already have those relationships, I think they've done about as well as they possibly can do when it comes to that coaching dynamic.
Completely agree. Now, you have to see how these coaches mesh together. We have to see how they relate to players, but on paper, given what he was dealt, the shrunken timeline in which Sharon had to act. On top of that, as I mentioned during the open, Mark, we've got connections now with multiple NFL teams, but if you understand the way that the Harbaugh metric works, everybody competes against each other all the time. So you have each other's backs, but there's no, I won't hire that guy because, I'm competing against my brother or my mentor. It's like, well, I guess, you better give a better offer than I mean, that's kind of the rules of engagement in the Harbaugh, realm. It's okay to compete with one another. So, he's out there trying to keep this Ravens defensive system together. And we've got 3 NFL franchises that are now having to hire for that exact same system. 3, the Ravens, the Chargers, and the Seahawks. So to come out of this with, is he a bit wounded? I mean, we wouldn't have, first of all, Wink Martindale wouldn't have come here for any amount of money 3 years ago. He wouldn't have had to. All right. But to come out of here with a guy who's one of the architects of the system, to me, there's only so many people that know this system, only so many people who can coordinate it. And you're competing with 3 NFL teams. And then that's not even counting other programs and teams that are like, I think I'd like to get a piece of that system too, seeing how good it is. To come out of this with basically the architect of it, I just think that's a tremendous win for Sharon Moore. And if you look at the way our program's been structured, Jim has always allowed his defensive coordinators to essentially act as head coach of the defense, that's their side of the ball. He's always heavily delegated there. Don Brown, that was the case with him. That was the case with the guy that we had. I can't remember his name, who went to Maryland, and then went to back to the SEC. What's that?
Josh Gaddis?
No, Gaddis was on offense. I'm thinking defensively. He always allows, he left our job to go coach at Maryland, and the player died there. I can't remember his name, but
DJ Durkin.
DJ Durkin, thank you. In this system, and especially the young coach, I just need to get my arms around the program the first year. I need a guy that I know can manage that side of the ball. I don't have to wonder, hey, what drills are they doing? What scheme are they running? And I think that was huge to bring Wink Martindale in. I think that was, frankly, about the best possible hire we could have asked for, realistically, given our situation.
So that's my point, Steve. When you say we're just going to have to wait and see about how well they work together as a chemistry, I'm all about, to take us to the beginning of our conversation, I'm all about looking at comparable situations throughout history, trying to liken that and to see how many times has this worked, how many times has it not worked. Let's eliminate various variables. And that's exactly what Sharon Moore has done. So we won't know because it's a whole new team. It's a new dynamic. It's a new dynamic of these coaches in these particular positions working together. Some have worked together, some have not, and all of that. But they are all connected to the Michigan system. Most of them have worked together in some way. Most of them have worked successfully in this program that has won. And now you're putting it together. So you've eliminated as many possible variables and set yourself up for success from that standpoint about as well as you possibly can.
Probably the most controversial position I took in the Open is involving the quarterback position. So I want to get your take on it. I don't think J.J. McCarthy's loss is as catastrophic as it will be billed by a lot of rival fan bases this offseason. Which I find funny because on one hand, these folks are like obsessed with his NFL draft prospects, like sit on Twitter all day long, every missed throw in a drill. He's not that good. All right, so he's not that good, but then our program's going to end if we don't have him back. Pick one, okay? He's pretty good, but the difference, the nuance here is we don't run a quarterback-dependent program. And Mel Kiper said last week, I heard him say, the hardest player for him to evaluate in this entire draft is J.J. McCarthy. Because he has every trait and tool you want of a top 10 pick in the NFL, but he doesn't have the volume of tape. They just didn't use him enough. He didn't have to throw the ball enough. He didn't, even in high pressure leverage, you never saw him on 3rd and 6 in State College having to throw for a first down to close out the game. Never saw that, And most weeks we were just rolling people the 2 years that he started. We were just naming the score. He did make a couple of key throws against Alabama late. But one of them was a brilliantly schemed 4th down play where we just out-formationed Alabama and, Blake Corum was wide open. And the other one, frankly, should have been intercepted and Roman Wilson made an incredible catch off a deflection. And so we just didn't ask him to do much, which I kind of think actually makes what he did more impressive. The fact that you were never permitted every week to really get into a rhythm. And then we were just like, all right, JJ, we need you to thread the needle here to Roman Wilson on this over route against Ohio State, in the end zone. And you're still able to do that when you're playing really spot duty. I kind of think is more impressive, but we don't run a quarterback dependent program. What we need is a quarterback who a handful of games can make a throw that keeps the defense honest because we want to play a certain complementary style. And I go to watch, did you watch Cornelius Johnson's workout at the Combine?
No.
You should have. 6'3", ran a 4.45. Now, we barely threw the ball to that kid in 5 years here, And the best game he ever had was in Columbus 2 years ago. 6'3", running 4.45. That's classic Michigan ex-receiver in the Lloyd Carr era stuff. That's Amani Toomer stuff. We never threw it to him at all, 3 targets a game. So this idea that we had this pedestrian receiving core, no, we didn't. We just didn't want to throw the ball. That was just our system. Hey, we're going to play complementary football. We have a great defense. We're going to smash. We're going to wear you down. And so I think the 6 offensive linemen that we have to replace much more, I think, vital to the ceiling of our team this fall than the loss of J.J. McCarthy, just because of the way we play and want to play. Your thoughts?
Okay, so this faction of the fan base that is picking on J.J. McCarthy from some anonymous rival fan base, possibly, I don't know who that would be exactly, could they possibly be mirroring the same people that were out there on social media after C.J. Stroud went like 4 of 9 with 2 interceptions in his first preseason NFL game that were saying, see, he's garbage. He can't play. He'll never be able to play in the NFL. Must be the same mentality.
Yes.
All right. Here's my thought about the quarterback position is that J.J. McCarthy is arguably the greatest at that position in the history of Michigan football, probably is. All right. And yes, the number of high leverage situations, considering him going to 3 consecutive college football playoffs and playing through his rival to the Big Ten championship game, is as low as you're going to see it for anyone playing that many championship level games. In terms of the quarterback situation going forward, my thought is, do you trust, as a Michigan fan, having the knowledge of who's going to be evaluating these quarterbacks? It comes down to, we have not seen enough of them. At least I haven't, and I watch Michigan's spring game. I don't sit there and diagnose high school tape, but I watch the games, and then I watch the spring game. I don't think we have enough ourselves that we can make an evaluation. We have to leave it up to the pros that are watching the winter workouts, watching spring practice, that are paid to make the evaluation. Do we trust their evaluation? And are they going to determine, okay, one of these guys is ready for the 2024 Big Ten season to be a championship level quarterback? If not, there is more downside to going to the transfer portal in regards to pissing off your future star quarterback, pissing off the quarterback room in general. And I'm not that as concerned about that, but just kind of messing with team chemistry that we have stated so many times is so key to the resurgence and now stability and maintenance of this program, that you are playing with more risk than reward going to the transfer portal on one hand. And then on the other, while the transfer portal quarterback stock has been extremely deep this offseason, outside of Cam Ward and Dylan Gabriel, I don't think that there's actually been a game-changing kind of quarterback out there, because typically those guys stay with their same team or they're off to the NFL. So I just think that they better be cautious about the move that they make and trust their evaluation. But if none of those players can be a championship contending quarterback in the Big Ten, then they have to see what their options are in the transfer portal. And I got to think that most of those guys, and there was a litany of them during the first phase of the transfer portal, the KJ Jeffersons and Will Rogers of the world, there were tons of those guys. I can't think that there are going to be many experienced, proven quarterbacks out there after this second go-around after spring practice.
I definitely think when you're the defending national champions, you can at least, if you wanted to, you can at least do what Auburn did last year by poaching Michigan State's 2-year starting quarterback in the spring. You could at least do that. But Auburn had to do that because they didn't have a functional quarterback on the roster, and they learned that through the spring. That's the only reason I think Michigan would do it, or either Orji or Denegal, heaven forbid, has a season-ending injury, and then you're looking at a depth situation. You know, Jaden Davis, the star recruit, kind of a star recruit, I guess, top 200 kid. He wants to redshirt. His parents are making that very clear. So, then you're in a depth situation. Jack Tuttle's back for his 7th year, but there's reports that he's going to miss all spring with with some arm surgery. And so I got to think that probably takes him out of the starting quarterback race if he's not there all spring long. And so if Michigan goes into the portal this spring, it means either Orji and or Denegal either got hurt or disappointed, meaning that they don't think both of those guys could start a game. Either one of them could or neither one of them could. That's what I think, Mark.
And Steve, the final point for me in regards to the questions that you lay out, which are always masterfully crafted in regards to, and I think that's why you get such an interesting response from your fan base, is about the transfer portal itself. So for a Michigan roster that I think was probably, and you're going to be able to answer this so much better than I, better prepared for Big Ten seasons in 21, 22, and 23. And then I'm looking at the transfer portal additions and mostly the losses. Keon Sabb, Amarian Walker, Darius Clemens, and I know that Clemens didn't contribute at Michigan, but of course has the vast potential, that I'm going to be somewhat concerned on the Michigan behalf if they don't get into the transfer portal to supplement this roster after losing the type of talent that they lost off the two deep this year.
Yeah, they will. I mean, defensively, this is and you see this in Bill Connolly's ratings. He has Ohio State and Michigan 1-2 in defense in the country. Defensively, this is a top 5 team. I mean, they're loaded defensively. Offensively, we could see them try to go for a tackle. And again, you would normally say you wouldn't be able to get a good tackle in the spring portal, but I don't know. If I'm an all-conference tackle, I'll just randomly pick a school like Kansas. Michigan calls me with the Joe Moore award-winning line and Sharon Moore is my head coach, and that's a much bigger stage for value and everything else. That's a unique situation where I think someone would take a call that they normally would not take that late in the process. But tackle could be a place I think they look. Receiver, just because a lot of the guys they are bringing back are kind of Jeremy Gallon, shorter slot types. Maybe you want more of an X guy in there. And then for sure, like they did last year, they got to get a corner opposite Will Johnson. I'm not sure that Josh Wallace's replacement is on campus, and Josh Wallace wasn't on campus last spring. And then he ended up being, an absolute gem of a find. So I think they will. I love the two guys they brought in. I think they'll both start. I think Jayshon Barnum, you could argue he's a top 5 linebacker in the Big Ten. I mean, you will not, I think he just steps in for Junior Colson right away. I kind of think Ernest Hausman and Jayshon Barnum is probably about as good as Junior Colson and Michael Barrett, frankly, as a duo. And then I think Josh Pree will be at least a floor of a competent Big Ten starter at one of the guards. I think that will happen. And then I actually think the interior of the line will be very good again. I am concerned about the tackle position. And you guys went through this last year where your head coach opened up Big Ten Media Day saying, hey, we're still looking for tackles. I could foresee maybe Sharon might be saying the same thing in July on our end. So that is something to watch this spring for sure. But yeah, I think they would have gone in there more, but we were just, a lot of this was being determined while Jimmy was deciding whether to stay or not. And you look at the year before, I think everybody kind of knew he was going to stay, given the caliber of team coming back, even while he was meeting with the Broncos. And so we just loaded up in the portal with a lot of big-time guys. This year, there was much more of a question about whether he would come back or not. And I think that's why the initial portal entrees were modest.
I'm still stuck on Jeremy Gallon. Didn't Jeremy Gallon catch what would have been the game-winning touchdown in the Outback Bowl against South Carolina?
Yeah, Jeremy Gallon was a hell of a player. Yeah.
Yes, he was.
I'd love Samaj Morgan reminds me a lot of Jeremy Gallon. Maybe faster, but very similar body type, size. Yeah.
In what I consider to be probably the most underrated Michigan team. 8-5, but that close against so many excellent teams to getting it done that year.
Yep, that was a
really good team.
That was a pretty good team in terms of the metrics. You're right. All right, man. Good to see you as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you, what should Michigan do at quarterback this offseason? 41% of you, a plurality, said Michigan should wait to see how the spring goes first. 30% of you said to definitely add a transfer. 29% of you said to stay in-house. So those two options pretty evenly split, about as close as it gets, by the way. That brings us to our feedback of the week from Michigander, who says, why go outside for a quarterback who may or may not fit the system? We already tried that experiment with Shea Patterson, and look how that turned out. Dude was not good by any means. He was okay at best. Keeping someone who has learned the system for a couple of years now is the best way to go about it. Don't fix anything that doesn't need fixing. Well, the reason they went outside for Shea Patterson is they didn't have a quarterback. We learned that in 2017. They started multiple quarterbacks. None of them were able to carry the program, and that's why they had to do that with Shea. And it wasn't like he was terrible. I mean, they won 19 games those 2 years. They were playing for the Big Ten, the divisional championship Shea's first year. So I mean, he didn't meet potential here, no, but he wasn't awful by any means, and they did that because they didn't have an option. In this case, you do have options. You do have guys that you did recruit, that you've put in the program for a few years, that are immersed in your culture. And both Denegal and Orji now are going to get all the reps they need this spring to prove themselves. So we'll see what happens. That'll do it for this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, share, follow if you're watching here on YouTube or listening on iTunes and elsewhere. We'd love it if you would do that because it helps us to find more Michigan fans just like you. Also, leave us a comment on any of those platforms. We would appreciate that as well. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter in between episodes also, or X, at Michigan Podcast there. That's at Michigan Podcast there. Until the next time, I'm Steve Deace. Go Blue.